Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, cha, bonjour, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We're coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, oh so sunny neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and really humbled that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can join us in that mission by telling all of your family and friends that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Audible, Amazon Music, CastBox, Player FM. Wherever you find your favorite shows, you can find the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're really excited with two wonderful guests for you today. First up, Deborah Farmer Kris. She is a driving force behind Parenthood365.com and the author of I See You Play. And later in the show, we'll be listening to a listen back to our conversation with Ben Feller. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by We're Going to the Dinosaur Forest, written by Marie Nichols. Marie Nichols was recently on my Connecticut Book Festival's podcast, and what a delightful woman. One of the things she said really struck home with me. She said, parents nurture with care, siblings are taught to share, but grandparents embrace the dares. We're Going to the Dinosaur Forest is a colorful, fun-filled book where this grandmother dares to embark on a wild journey with her grandson into the dinosaur forest. It's available on Amazon. It's also available on bookshop.org. You and your kids and you and your grandkids are going to love this book. It's We're Going to the Dinosaur Forest, written by Marie Nichols. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Woofy and the Dinosaur Adventures, delightful children's book written by Helen Rogerson. Woofy awakens suddenly to a feeling that his friend Bun needs him. When he arrives at the place his nose leads him, Woofy is confused and doesn't find Bun right away. Then a shout from above leads to an amazing experience as he puts his paleontology skills to work. Together, he, Bun, and a cat that hangs around the site wrap up a wonderful adventure involving a T-Rex skull and a very cool twist of an ending. The story is told in a lyrical style that incorporates actual fossil hunting concepts and vocabulary. If you like dinosaurs, friends who help, and adventures, you will love this book. You can check out Woofy and the Dinosaur Adventures and all the Woofy books at unpackyourownhappy.com. Joining us right now from the great state of Massachusetts, where you are never more than a mile and a half away from the closest Dunkin' Donuts. Our guest is here today to celebrate a whole lot. Celebrate her book, I See You Play, her book, I Love You All the Time, and her wonderful website, Parenthood365.com. Please welcome to the show, Deborah Farmer Kris. Hey, Deborah, how are you?
So good. I think I have 2 Dunkin' Donuts within 2 miles of me, actually.
You know, I am always amazed when I'm driving down the street and there's a Dunkin' Donuts on the right and there's a Dunkin' Donuts on the left. And I'm like, how can these exist so close? But they do, and they thrive and they multiply. So
nobody has to turn around. They can just keep going the direction they're going.
Exactly. It's wonderful, and I very rarely visit. Tell me, let's start kind of at the hub, that your Parenthood365.com. Yeah. What a great website. It's not just kids' books. There's a lot of information there for parents.
So my passion is parent education. I began as a K-12 educator for 20 years. I taught just about every grade K through 12 and did some administration. And one of the things I discovered I really liked doing was talking to parents about their kids but helping them troubleshoot. And so at some point I when my own kids were at an age where I wanted to not work as full-time in schools and try something a little different, I began to write a parenting column for PBS Kids. And then I began to do more parent journalism for NPR's Mind Shift and for the Washington Post. And while I was in the midst of doing this, I had this idea for a children's book. And so I wrote one. The first one was I Love You All the Time. And I sent it to a publisher who got back to me and said, we love this, but we would love it to be a series. And so one of the reasons I liked this publisher in particular and sought them out was at the back of every single one of my, there will be 10 books by the end of this year, children's books, there's a letter to caregivers, which gives tips and advice. And one of my thoughts was, not everybody has time to read a parenting book. I mean, I have one of those coming out too this May, but most of us read to our kids, or we should be reading to our kids. And so if I can boil down some of the most practical wisdom of parenting and put it in a picture book, and then at the end give a couple of practical tips the way I do with my PBS Kids column, that I thought might be a way to reach parents who might not be tuning in or going to the to the workshop or what, because parents are busy. So that was my original idea, is like, how can I find another way to share some of these really beautiful, inspiring parenting messages to a different audience?
Parenting is one of those things that doesn't come with a manual.
No.
And so many folks, and I think one of the things is hard today. When I was growing up, and I've mentioned this on the podcast, everybody on both sides of my family lived within a square mile of each other. So there was a lot of support. Frankly, there was too much support as far as I was concerned when I was a kid. But for me and my cousins, there was, we were all kind of born around the same time. So there was lots of support from parents, from siblings. But these days, because we're so spread out, we don't have that kind of network that we had in the past. And it's not so easy to walk down the street and drop the kids off with grandma or grandpa, because grandma and grandpa live in a different state.
It is a much lonelier parenting existence. And I think, you're just not meant to parent in a vacuum, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's from being able to be with parents at a bus stop and talk about things. The neighbor, I'm very lucky to live in a neighborhood with a lot of kids around my kids' age. But before we moved to this particular neighborhood, I didn't, right? Like when my kids were very, very young, my neighborhood was not a place where people reached out much. And I'm so lucky, because I realized what I was missing when suddenly you got that sense of my kid was learning how to ride a bike and neighbors came out to cheer him on. And I thought, we overuse the phrase, it takes a village, but it takes more than us to raise kids. And, some of the self-doubt with parenting is, am I the only one experiencing this? Is my kid the only kid? And, when you can socialize the experience in the sense of being able to talk it out and just to get that support, whether that's a group of moms that you can text together or wherever you can find it, that is literally one of the most powerful and healthy things we can do, is find at least a couple of other people in the trenches that can be a support system, because it just is not meant to be a solitary exercise. Like raising kids is complex. And, it was never meant to be a solitary exercise. Like, that's not human evolution. There's always been villages to raise kids. And if we don't naturally have them, I think seeking them out is just vital. Yeah. I agree. When my kids were young, we were fortunate. They both enjoyed activities, went to a school where the other parents were very supportive. It was a great school where where the kids didn't get picked up by a bus. You'd bring them in, you drop them off, but it wasn't like, all right, get out of the car and go. It's parents would get out of the car and hang out and talk and chit chat, and the same at dance class and same at football practice. It was, and you would share a lot of that. Oh man, this kid is driving me crazy. What can I do? And it's like you get some good advice, and
some bad advice, but you'd kind of sift through that stuff.
Absolutely. No, I feel like yesterday was one of those moments, my favorite topic in the world to talk about with parenting is awe and wonder. And that's in so many of my children's books and parenting book. But, yesterday morning, I got a text from a friend at my kids' school, and she was sick with the stomach flu and said, is there any chance you can pick me up some, saltines and ginger ale? And, and I was able to do that. And then later in the day, I was late at a doctor's appointment and knew I couldn't get my son from school. And I texted another parent who not only picked him up, but took my son and her son out for ice cream. And by the time I arrived, she was listening intently while he described his theory of time and the Marvel universe. And I thought, like, this is the gift, right? Like another adult who says, I've got your back, and our kids seeing it. Our kids seeing that that's the social fabric.
Yeah. We're right now, our neighborhood, it's going through a fascinating change. When my kids were growing up, there were lots of kids the same age. It's a very stable neighborhood here in Boston, very diverse. A lot of teachers, firefighters, police officers, city workers living here. But those kids grew up, and now they're in their late 20s, their 30s, and suddenly a lot of their parents have moved away, and we have an influx of young families. And it's just beautiful. There's just like a whole new generation of kids. And, mentioning helping out a couple of months ago, we heard a knock on the door, and one of the new neighbors with their little 1.5-year-old said, could you please help me? I don't have a car seat. I have to drive the other kids to school. Can you? And it's like, of course, come on in. And, in fact, he's coming to visit in a couple of hours, and we're looking forward to it.
I love that.
Yeah. So what is it like? What was how did the transition feel from going from a teacher and an educator to a kind of a parenting guru to a children's book author?
In some ways, very natural, because all of it's around child development. Like, it's all about kids and what's best for kids. And that's been exciting to me since I think I was a kid. Like, I wanted to be a teacher. I was fascinated by it. And I think all aspects of how we help kids thrive are endlessly fascinating to me. I did this reading at a bookstore a couple of days ago, and it was mostly 3-year-olds there. And I thought I could spend my whole day just like watching these amazing 3-year-olds who are so excited about the world and everything and noticing. And each one of these aspects of my life just gives me another avenue to explore the wondrousness of small humans.
The book, your parenting book that's coming out is, I believe it's called Raising Awe Seekers.
It is, How the Science of Wonder Can Help Kids Thrive. Yes.
I'm sure your kids' books are amazing and awesome, but they're board books and they're picture books, and I would love to dig in a little bit to Raising Awe Seekers.
Great.
Because one of the things that I'm fascinated with is that we're really lucky. We're living in a time where science is proving that a lot of old wisdom, a lot of that common sense wisdom that was passed down, it's accurate, and there's science to back it up. So, I'd love to hear about the science that can help us raise awe seekers.
You are speaking my language. So let me tell you how I got inspired to do this study. Much of my parenting work is around emotions and helping kids understand and navigate often difficult and tricky emotions. But along about fall of 2021, a school had asked me to come give a talk, by Zoom at that point, on like stress and resilience. And I don't know if you remember fall of 2021, but we were all having our primal yell moments as parents. It was so, and I realized I didn't really want to talk about those. Like, I wanted to talk about something that just felt more hopeful, right? Like, resilience is so important, but I kind of had this inner revolt. And one day I was looking through, I don't know how I found it, and I found this white paper, right? That's just like basically a summary of research. So a 30-page white paper on the science of awe, AWE. And most of this work initially came out of Dr. Keltner's work at Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And I read that and I got goosebumps. I was like, this is amazing, because one of the things they found is that this emotion, which when you're talking about emotions, you're thinking happy, sad, mad, scared, surprised. You're not thinking awe, but it's an emotion. It's that emotion you feel when you encounter something that's wonderful, wondrous, outside your frame of reference, something that may cause you to have questions or be open to mysteries. And he says, you know you're feeling it when you get goosebumps, when you tear up, or when you simply go, wow. And for little kids, it's like, for me, it's like the big eyes. When their eyes get big, when they see the caterpillar coming out of the chrysalis as a butterfly, like that's this awe. And one thing that they've discovered in so many studies now is that when you feel this, it has a cascade of positive benefits. It helps you be more generous. That it helps you have the good kind of humility, that kind of small self, that sense of, I'm looking up at the stars and it's so amazing. My problems don't feel quite so big. And when you're raising kids and they feel like they're the only person in the world who's ever had a pimple on their forehead or been dumped by a boyfriend, like having some of that thing that zooms you out is important. It is strongly correlated with curiosity, which then is also correlates with academic success, because it turns out when you are curious about something, you want to learn it and you learn it better. And it has all kinds of research about how feeling wonder and awe is just good for your mental and emotional health. Kids in high, there's this great study by Craig Anderson out of UC Berkeley, and he took two groups of people on river rafting trips. He took young combat veterans, and he took high schoolers who lived in communities that had had a lot of community violence. And the initial screening found that the levels of stress were actually higher for these high school students than for the combat veterans. And then they did these swabs of kind of saliva for, stress hormones before and after. And going out on these river rafting trips, it dramatically reduced the levels of stress, not only immediately, but a few weeks after, right? They're having these moments where they were just out in nature and, present in that moment. So this book, they've uncovered through research really, 7 or 8 very typical, like sources of awe, kind of umbrellas. And I've taken each one of those and turned it into a chapter. So there's a chapter on nature. So that's the most obvious, right? You think about awe, you think about the sunsets, you think about, the Grand Canyon. And then there's a chapter on music, on art, on big ideas, when you just learn something new and you just say, wow. There's a chapter on what we call collective effervescence, which is a fancy term, which means that feeling you get when you're part of a community that's engaged in something good together. So maybe being part of a choir or part of a team. And we know how much our teens especially crave that feeling of belonging. So much so that if they don't find it in good ways, they'll seek it out in other ways. Then there is life and death, right? The beginnings and endings. And then finally, and this is, for me as a parent, one of the most hopeful pieces of research, and that is the most common source of awe when they do these awe diaries across multiple countries, thousands of people. It's noticing people, the goodness of other people. It is noticing kindness and courage. So that when we see somebody, running to help somebody who fell, like when we see somebody stand up for what's right, we feel that. Like that is actually one of the most potent sources of awe and wonder. And I feel like with the steady stream we get and our kids get through social media, it's an imbalanced diet. And so much of our job as parents is to help them get perspective and to recognize that most people are good. And that there's so much goodness everywhere, because that inspires us, that makes us feel awe. And then we want to, again, one of the outcomes of awe is that you're more generous, right? That kids who experience awe are more likely to help a stranger than somebody who is focused on, something else in front of them that's not awe-inspiring. Yeah. So that's my Cliff Notes. I could talk for hours about this, Jen.
Well, we've got at least a half. But,
all right.
You mentioning there are a couple of times that I remember being awe, but the last umbrella of seeing somebody generous, and I'm almost hesitant to talk about this because I don't want to toot my own horn, but my niece, who I adore, surprised me the other day, and she said, "Do you remember that time we got into an accident?" And I said, "No. What do you?" "Oh, it was about a year and a half ago, and someone, we were stopped at a light, and somebody hit us from behind, and it was such a minor thing that it just, kind of, I forgot about it." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." She goes, "You got out, and you weren't angry. You went over to the people, and you said, 'Are you okay?' And at the time, I didn't know why you were doing it, because I was like angry. I wanted to yell at them, but that was such a great example, and I was like, thank you." And I had no idea that I did that, but I'm glad I did.
But those do you remember when stories, that is one of the strategies that I talk about in the book, because our kids have experienced these things. And not only, I'm now making a point to try to notice something every day to share with my kids. It's a very simple practice, but it forces me to tune in, right? Of like, what am I noticing right now? But sometimes it's going to be like, do you remember that time when we went to the Martha's Vineyard Sharks baseball game, and we came out and we had a flat tire, and we were parked in some field, and there were no lights, and I was panicking, and next thing I know, somebody's knocking on my window, and it's somebody there to help me pump up, my tire. And it was one of those moments where, like, what was scary was suddenly this feeling of kind of wonder that he was there at the right time and could help me. And those are moments when you share those as a family, like, those become family lore. Mm-hmm. Those become some of those family stories of, a time a grandparent did something hard and was brave. Like, the stories of perseverance and courage and kindness, like, that should be part of the steady diet for our kids, because they are absorbing from our culture. There's just so much bombarding them, and not all that much of it are these stories, which are actually super common, right? People are doing kind things all the time, but it doesn't make the headlines. Yeah. So Jamil Zaki, he is a Stanford researcher, and he just wrote a great book called Hope for Cynics. And so I interviewed him for a parenting article about raising kids in cynical times. And he says with his kids, he practices something called social savoring, which I love. Because he said, think about if it's really good food, how you savor it, right? You don't gobble it down. You take it, small pieces, you savor it. And he said, when you noticed a good interaction, right, something positive, like, stop and savor it, allow it to be a memory, right? You're having this, when somebody stops to help you, or you're having a beautiful interaction with your child's teacher, or your kid unexpectedly, helps you with the dishes when you're having a tough night, like, pause to notice. And then when you talk about it, that's like another layer of noticing it, because it's embedding it in the memory. And all of these things, because our brains are so tuned to threat, right? Because it's, we're supposed to be aware of the sounds and all of that, and the dangers, and is there a tiger in the bushes? We have to often train ourselves to look for the other. And that's so much of what I say in raising awe seekers, is that it's really about, almost changing our prescription lenses, so we can see more clearly, so that when we are, going on a walk, I often listen to my podcasts, but I try to take like a few walks a week I call them my wonder walks, where I just try to look at beautiful things, right? I try to take one beautiful picture I can send my daughter. And so this morning I took the dog out. It was really early, and it was very weird in Boston. It was like, it had just frozen. So there were these water droplets on the trees that the outside had frozen, but the inside hadn't. And they were beautiful. And so, my neighbor was pulling out his trash barrels, and I have my camera trying to take a picture of a water droplet, and I waved hello to him. And, those are the things that I'm constantly now trying to tune into, because it helps me stay grounded in the beauties of this world. Because one of the other things I love about awe is that it's not, some people talk now about toxic positivity, right? Of like, good vibes only. This is about, even if you're going through a hard time, being able to hold the beauty too, right? So it's, I tell the story in the book of, my dad, after he passed away, this is before I had kids. It was a really tough winter for a lot of reasons. And I walked outside one December morning and there was this rosebud on a bush, and roses don't bloom in New Jersey in December. And I just stood there and stared at it. Like, it was absolute awe, wonder, mystery. And I took a picture of it that I still have. And it's not that like fixed anything. It just reminded me that I was capable of noticing beauty even during difficult times. And that for me is the wonder. It doesn't mean that, ignore difficulty. It's reminding you that there are sources of wonder surrounding us day in and day out. And if we can tune into them, it's going to help us feel better on every level.
Yeah. Well, that is something that is really needed now, not only for our little ones, but definitely for our teens that are bombarded by social media. Something weird happened to my algorithm yesterday. For some reason, Instagram was just sending me all these pictures of kids fighting. It was weird. I never saw, and it's gone now. I think it was just like there was a glitch in the algorithm, and I'm like, and I'm shaking my head. And I know that there are kids out there that are getting that all the time.
Yeah.
And
it's shaping their sense of reality and what people are like, you know? And that's why being able to kind of purposefully pause and connect them of, going to the farmer's market, getting to know the neighbor's name or the neighbor's dog's name, right? Like all these things that can just tune them into, these beauties that surround us. Like that's the counter programming. The counter programming is not better videos, although, social media can be a source of awe when you see beautiful things, but it's actually really touching grass. It's like being really in touch with this world. Like that's the beautiful and really quite simple counter programming that as parents we can do.
Now, you were talking about, reminding kids of these moments, like my niece reminded me. Is that a way to kind of experience the awe all over again and in a different way?
Yeah, one of the great things about humans is that we have this capacity to feel about something that is in the past, right? This is the whole idea of like PTSD, is that you're still re-experiencing that memory over again. And so one of the things that these other memories do is that, if you sit back and you think of just a really beautiful memory, like a beautiful day with your kids, you're going to, if you sit with it, right, the smells are going to come back. The images are going to come back, and then the feeling comes back with it. And when you pause to savor and you tell the stories, that embeds those memories a little more deeply, right? So if, there'll be times even, we took the kids on vacation last week. Actually, we took them to where we spent our honeymoon. It was our 20th anniversary this year. So we've been planning this for years. And, on the very last night, there was a beautiful sunset. And I was like, okay, everybody take a picture in your brain, take a snapshot, right? Because it's like, that's going to remind you like that, like we're all here in this moment together. And so having those memories, having those pictures, all of those, that's a form of creativity, creating memories. And so, letting them tell their own stories, you telling stories, noticing all of these things, just like gratitude journals have been shown to be so powerful because you're pausing and you're writing it down, and it just makes it a little more concrete. Awe diaries are similar. I'm doing a project right now called 365 Days of Wonder on all my social channels, where I'm just looking for one thing a day in any of these 7 categories that makes me feel this. And sometimes they're really tiny, tiny things like the dewdrop, right? And sometimes they're bigger. But I'm now, what is it? I'm on day 58. This is the 58th day of the year. And some days I have 20 and I have to choose which one. And other days, like it was been really cold for your listeners who are not in New England. It's been a cold month. And it was a Monday, a couple Mondays ago, and it was icy and cold, and I was not in a good mood, and I'd been on my screens much too long riding that day. And I was driving to pick up my daughter from school because my son was homesick with the flu. And I was like, I don't have anything for today. Like, I have no wonder. And then I got behind a school bus, which is like going to make 10 stops on the way to school. So I'm feeling this. And I thought, okay, like maybe there'll be music. Maybe I'll see something beautiful. Like, I'm going through my sources of awe. And suddenly I look over and there's this beautiful dog that's sitting on this front step, patient, absolutely at alert. And the second his human teenage child walked off the bus, this dog flew across the yard and just jumped up. And you could see this teenager who had kind of trudged off with their backpack just light up. And I teared up and I thought, that's it, right? Didn't make the day, like, it was still a hard day, but I had that 15 seconds where I tuned into something else. And so in so many ways, like, writing this book has just been my own journey for like my own self. And when you work on yourself, you work on your kids. Like, we can only give as much as we have, right? So I figure, anything I can do for myself, that's going to pay off for my two amazing children.
Isn't that wonderful when we set out to do something for others and it really benefits us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's a message that I gave for many years during my educational magic shows, traveling around the country at schools. And I remember it was at a Catholic school, and a priest saw the show, and I was, encouraging, be kind to others, and it's really great because it makes you feel really good. And the priest came up afterwards and he said, "You shouldn't say that." I said, "What are you talking about?" "You shouldn't tell kids that they should be nice because it makes them feel good. They should just be nice because they've been told to be nice." And I'm like, yeah, Father, I think the reason we feel good about it is because God knew that if we were nice, and he put it in there so that we do it more often. I don't know. You're the expert when it comes to God, but that's just the way I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's true, because it's like that's a gateway in, right? Like, if you do it and it feels good, and then it's like you explore that, right? You start to crave, because we have all kinds of cravings as humans. Mm-hmm. And if we can start to crave the good stuff, right? That's, I feel like just so much of my adult life is just like so many things are competing for my attention. Like, how do I train myself to like focus on what matters most? And that is a daily challenge.
It really is. And there are, we're talking about social media and just people day to day, last year at this time, people on one side of the political world were complaining that Armageddon was happening because the other side was in charge. Now that's flipped over, and the people who were happy last year are losing their minds. Boy, if we could.
Exhausting.
Yes, it really is. And I just hope that people will listen to this and take your advice to seek out that awe.
Yeah.
We should tell everybody, I already told people they can go to parenthood365.com. What else will they find there?
Oh, they'll find so much. So there's articles there. There is my podcast there, and it's a short one. It's called Raising Awe Seekers. They're about 6 to 7 minute episodes that just highlight one little piece, a story or piece of research. And then there are links to my social channels and links to, my articles for PBS Kids and things like that. So, whether you like to watch it, read it, listen to it, I have it for you there.
Excellent. And we can also find out about your kids' book series, the All the Time series.
Yep, the All the Time series is for kind of your 4 to 6 year olds. So I love you all the time, you wonder all the time, you're growing all the time, and you have feelings all the time. And then there is a set for the babies and the toddlers. It's the board book, the I See You. And all of these have, advice and tips for caregivers in the back.
I love it. This has been a fantastic conversation about a whole lot of stuff, but mostly about awe. I think this is kind of an awe-inspiring conversation, at least for me. I don't know about anybody else that are listening, but I think it probably is. We had a great time speaking to the Awe Master, our guest Deborah Farmer Kris. Deborah, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, families, would you like to share a miracle with your kids? At the Wolf Conservation Center, hope was fading. The endangered Mexican wolves dreamed of a pup, but none had come. Until one tiny miracle changed everything. Meet Trumpet, a real-life wolf pup whose incredible birth brought joy, hope, and a lesson in conservation. Trumpet the Miracle Wolf, written by Leocadia George, is a heartwarming true story that will inspire your whole family. Teach your kids the power of hope, love, and protecting endangered species. Get your copy today and join the wild adventure. Join us right now from New York City. Our guest is here today to celebrate his debut picture book. Please welcome to the show author and father and the author of Big Problems, Little Problems, Ben Feller. Hey, Ben, how are you?
I am doing great. So excited to chat with you and your listeners and to be focused on this book. It's been fun.
I'm really excited for you. We'll talk a little bit about what you've been doing before you became a children's author, but why don't we start by you just telling us all about this great picture book?
Yes, thank you so much. So the book is really about how to make life a little bit easier. That goes for our young kids who get frustrated by problems that they find overwhelming, but also for the parents in helping the kids understand how to convert big problems into little problems and how to have some perspective ourselves that the things that frustrate us really aren't that big of a deal. And so it began with my raising my son and figuring out, hey, you know what works? When I slow the moment down for a little bit, when I get down on one knee, because I'm a big guy, so let's get eye to eye here. Let's make everything a little bit smaller and slower and breathe. Solve the problem, which could be zipping up his sweater or finding a toy. And then seeing him realize that wasn't that big of a deal. Let's celebrate it. Let's do our secret handshake. Let's have a hug. Boom. On to the next thing. He's feeling better. I'm feeling better. That was just trial and error of parenting, and it worked. When I decided to write the book was the day that I was so frustrated getting caught in a traffic jam in New York City. I just thought it was the end of the world, like parents do when something goes wrong and we lose our perspective. And my son, from his car seat, saw me, heard me, and said, Daddy, don't get frustrated. Is this a big problem or a little problem? And I looked at him through the rearview mirror, and I'm like, oh, my gosh, he's getting it. I feel both proud as can be and kind of embarrassed, like, okay, he's right. I should breathe. It's just a traffic jam. The lights will change. The tunnel will clear. We will get home. Little problem. And that was the story I had in mind, and now it's come to fruition.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you didn't react like some parents would to turn around and tell you, kid, shut up. I don't need you. Don't
well,
need
I think that the profanity that had come out of my mouth made me feel like, all right, I've already checked the box on bad parenting. I won't repeat what I said, and I didn't put it in the book. But let's suffice to say, Sam knew I was frustrated.
Well, Sam's a very perceptive guy.
Yeah.
You know, you bring up a really good point. Little things can frustrate all of us, but especially kids. And kids, when they don't have the coping skills that hopefully we've developed by the time we're in our 20s, 30s, or almost 100s, you know, they can, you know, a little thing like buttoning your shirt or zipping your jacket can just ruin their day.
Yeah, they don't have two things. They don't have the coping skills that you mentioned, and they don't have perspective to know the difference between what's a big problem and a little problem. And the reason why they don't is that they haven't learned those things yet. They're not supposed to have them. Mm-hmm. So we as parents forget the 4-year-old version of ourselves. Of course we do. So when we have big problems trying to organize an entire organization at work, or we don't have a babysitter because somebody canceled and there's no daycare and we've got 5 minutes to figure it out, like we've got our big problems. We look at our kids and like, if you can't zip up your coat, it's not that big of a deal. Calm down. Well, that's not helpful because they don't know the difference. For them, they're not being able to do something. It feels bad inside. Their chest gets tight and they just need help. So we can provide the coping skills by showing them how to zip the coat so they can learn how to do it, helping them find the toy. But we can also provide perspective. And perspective doesn't come from condescending to somebody and saying, calm down, not a big deal. It's showing them right? Like, look, we solved that in 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
There's really nothing more to talk about. Don't you feel better? No, you do it. Okay. Look, good. Tomorrow when this happens and it gets stuck, oh, I see. Line up the grooves. Good. That's how you turn a big problem into a little one. But it's up to us to teach that.
Yeah. And we do forget the fact that there is our 4-year-olds, our 3-year-olds are learning everything. You know, we forget the fact that we came into the world, unlike our dogs and our cats who have all these instincts, we come into the world at zero.
Right.
And we need to build it all up, and we need to learn everything from scratch.
And one of the best parts about seeing the reaction to the book is not parents saying, oh, I never thought of that. It's parents saying, oh, I need to remember this. Mm-hmm. Remember that they come in at zero. Remember that I learned these lessons decades ago. And we have to, it's basically a playful reminder. Mm-hmm. Slow down. This is what works for me. Kneeling, breathing, laughing, rewarding small victories. Maybe you have your own way. But whatever your way is, take the time to do it. And by the way, listen to your kids because they're paying attention. So it's not just a matter of our problem solving. It's, okay, are these really big problems? If I start writing an email and here in the New York City, way of life, I get to a subway and I have no internet. How important is it that I gotta get that email before it's not. Mm-hmm. Just save it in drafts. Mm-hmm. What if you lost the email? Oh my gosh, craft it again, mm-hmm. right? But we get wrapped up because we got to get the next task done, and our kids see that, and it really, we can model by saying, "No, I'll just do the next one." And I've had to learn that myself. Mm-hmm. I going through the launch of the book, there have been times, even in the last week, where I've said to myself, "Ben, this is not a big problem. Don't just write about it. You got to preach it." And my son sees that. He sees, okay, yeah, we got it. We'll just get the next train. Mm-hmm. Life's a little easier.
Good for him. That's it. It is. It's a really important lesson for all of us because we are super, as we say here in Boston, we're all wicked busy. And we're trying to do 1,000,001 things. And it's important for us to remember that we can get by if we only do 1,000,000. And
right.
But most of all, what we have to do is to love our kids and embrace the time that we have with them.
Yeah, and reminders are important. And so, the messages I'm getting from people who have started to receive their book, they come in two forms usually. One is these amazing pictures or little videos of the kids, because the illustrations done by my colleague, Mercedes Lopez, are fun and creative and dynamic, and she really brought our story to life. So it's visually just so attractive. But also the stories from the parents of, I got something out of this. One person I chatted with said, I don't even really think this is a kid's book. I mean, it's packaged like one, but it has a real message in there about life and perspective. And so as the writer telling my personal story of raising Sam, to see other people's reactions come through, either in the smiles of their kids or sort of the reminders for the grown-ups, really rewarding. That's as a writer what you want. It's about reaching the audience and having all these different reactions that I never even would have thought of. It's truly fun.
Yeah. I think one of the things we forget, and it's too bad, we look at as adults, we look at picture books and it's like, oh yeah, it's for kids. My kid's too old for those now, so I'll never pick up a picture book again. In reality, we're all experiencing picture books, but moving picture books. We sit down, we spend every day, we learn a new story by watching a picture book on TV, a TV series or a movie or a video. And picture books are just the same thing. They're just short stories told in pictures with words.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And again, going back to the theme of, as parents, we need reminders. So my son is now 11, so he's moved out of largely the picture book stage, although he's partial to this one. But, when I would read picture books to him or with him earlier, those types of books are truly evocative. There's one that he has in his library, I think, we read it so long ago, Mommy Blows a Kiss, and it was about the affection between the mom and the son. And when she blows the kiss, it goes like around the store clerk and under the fruit aisle at the grocery store. And I can tell you that story now, but I'm picturing in my mind the illustrations. And I didn't think, oh, I can't wait to get this done. This is for him. I would always enjoy that and think about the creativity that went into it, because it's all part of the story. Mm-hmm. That's what we want. We want to be brought into the story. And you can do that through novels, and you can do that through music. You can do that through all kinds of literature, but picture books have a place. And I totally agree with you. I think adults still get a lot out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you are right. The illustrations in Big Problems, Little Problems are great. And they're very different. They're not the Disney kind of, and nothing wrong with this, but your illustrator has a very distinct style. And this has a very distinct feel and look to it. And it's quite beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. It's personally, it was fun to see how she went with my words. But from an audience perspective, when you get into themes like frustration and patience, how do you illustrate those? And she really dove into it with the frustration, the snarls of a zipper that feels caught, the frustration of a son and a father caught in a maze and looking for the way out. Like, those were all her ideas and her themes pulling it into life. You know, the joy that comes with a hug, the silliness and the levity of our secret handshake that she put into imagery. It's really fun. And I agree with you. It's very distinctive. It looks different, but boy, did she capture it. And again, that's what you want. Mm-hmm. That's really what you want, is that fit. Mm-hmm. And, the cover is the two of us hugging, and I'm crouching down to get to his height. And it's the celebrating of turning a big problem into a little one and solving it. And boy, it feels perfect.
Yeah. And just, you mentioned it a couple of times, and I just want to highlight it. A lot of times as adults, we'll bend over to talk to kids, and that's cool. But I think what you're talking about, crouching down, getting on your knee, bringing yourself down to their level, it really makes a difference. And it was something I discovered when I was working with kids with severe developmental disabilities. Just lowering myself to get to their level made a difference, and it was different than bending down, because I was still over them at that point. And when we can get down on our kids' level, it makes a huge difference. And I really recommend that to everybody who hasn't learned that lesson yet.
Well, it's fun to hear you say that, and even the difference between getting down on a knee and crouching over someone. Because what I remember as I'm listening to you is, and I see a lot of kids do this, when they feel embarrassed or frustrated or sad, they look down. Mm-hmm. They lower their head, they lower their eyes. It's like a physical letting down of themselves. And so if you're standing over them and their head is down, you're not connecting on any level. So what I would do is get down to his level and then gently, pick his chin up and say, let's reset here. Look at daddy. Okay. What's the problem? I can't do this. Okay. Well, then let's do it together. Zip. All right. Instantly we figured it out. So you feel better. It takes a second, but now you do it. You feel the power. Okay. It's just hard for me to picture doing all that at 6'1", standing over him, right? Let's get to his level. But eye contact and warmth and compassion and breathing all go into the problem solving. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that. I kind of felt like, what would I need here? And some of that was intuitive. And then when it worked, as I said earlier, parenting is trial and error. Hey, big problems, little problems. He's liking it. He's loving it. We were going to handshake. Let's go with it, right?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've had a lot of experience spending time with people who are solving big problems. You were the chief White House correspondent for Associated Press, the largest news organization in the world. You were the guy that asked the first questions at a presidential news conference. Did you learn this idea of making big problems into little problems from any of the leaders that you covered?
I think I learned it. It's easier to answer that question in retrospect. It wasn't like, it was this linear path of I did this and now I'm going to turn it into this book or this next stage of my career. Everything is easier to see looking back. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that I learned the problem solving from the people I covered, but I learned it in large part from having covered them, because the job of journalism is constantly problem solving. How am I going to figure out this information and make it accessible and accurate and clear and important to a lot of readers? And then as soon as you solve that, if you do it really well at the highest stakes at the White House against the biggest, most competitive press corps in the world, your reward is you start all over again the next day with a blank screen and a different problem that they also don't want to talk to you about. Mm-hmm. And over and over and over again, finding out the information, getting it right, getting it first, and then turning it into stories that matter to people. That informed the book in the sense that my career and a lot of my life has been about making the complicated simple for readers and how do we solve problems. Mm-hmm. And I brought that mindset into parenting. And, I didn't think about that necessarily when I was writing the book because it was just so personal and passionate. But the more I think back through interviews, I'm like, yeah, it's my style. It's consistent with my career, and everything I've done in the last several years has definitely been informed by what it was like to sit in that front seat and ask questions of the president. It's definitely has prepared me for other things in life, for sure.
Yeah. One of the things I like to ask anytime I have somebody in the media on the program, I think a huge part of my job as a parent, now my kids are adults, but I thought that at the time when they were younger that it was really important for me to help my kids become media literate and help them learn how to discern what information they could trust and what information they had to verify. It's, I think, even more of an issue now because kids are inundated with information from all different sources. Not all of them are reliable or reputable. What advice could you give to parents in how they can help their kids become media literate and know what sources to trust and what not to trust and to question and how to go about asking those questions?
So it's the last thing you said that I think would be my guidance. It's to question. And specifically, if you're a young reader and don't know the media landscape, like, how am I supposed to figure this out? Who do I trust? Your parents or the adults around you who you respect and who do have experience in this, I would ask them, how did you decide to follow that news outlet? Why do you always watch that morning show? When you go online and your newspaper of choice, your news source of choice is X. Why? And that way you're getting past I'm reading this and following these sites because my parents do. Mm-hmm. That's almost like an inheritance of news judgment. It's, well, why? And parents are going to have to do a little bit of work in that situation. Well, let me deconstruct my thinking. Sometimes it's going to be because of political views. This news outlet reinforces how I feel about politics in American life. And so I like that because we sort of talk to each other. That's not how I would do it, mm-hmm. right? I like the diversity of views, but mostly as a former reporter, I am an ardent fan of accuracy. What are the facts? How do you put them into context and how can you defend them? And so, there is such a thing as an empirical truth, right? This is the vote that happened. These are the elements of the bill. Here's why they did it. Here's how it's going to affect you. Here's how it's going to affect the election, right? Facts and analysis. And so, that's what I would do is just be a good questioner. Help me understand it. Why do you listen to that outlet? Why do you like them? And, I think it's going to be a really interesting experience for grown-ups in that situation because they're saying, hey, I'm raising a critical thinker and I'm helping. Yeah. And when I was a kid, we read the local newspaper. Why? Because they brought it to the door. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like there was 5 choices and we could have an analytical discussion about it. It's like, that's what you read. Mm-hmm. And then as life got more complex and, there was a thing called the internet. And now all these newspapers and sources are online. And now, boy, it's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It's overwhelming. So that's how I would start.
Yeah. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. To make sure you don't miss a moment of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your favorite shows. We love the iHeartRadio app. We love Good Pods, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your favorite shows, you can find Reading with Your Kids. And if you feel so inspired, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review. It helps people find out about the show, but more importantly, it helps people find out about our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, Deborah Farmer Kris. Please be sure to check out parenthood365.com. Also want to thank Ben Fella for joining us from a few years back. Be sure to check out his book. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.